to the Charter Podcast brought to you by St. Xavier University, and welcome into our beautiful United Center studios. For those who are watching on our streaming channels, if you are listening, we appreciate you as well. I am Ruthie Polinsky, your host, along with Alex Shapiro and Clay Harbor. Guys, we took this thing to the studio today because holy smokes, do the Bears trenches look different after the free agency negotiating window officially opened. It took the Bears approximately 19 minutes to get things done with Drew Dalman, the center, and the Falcons. And I think that's where we should start today. Of course, Jonah Jackson and Joe Toney, those terms were agreed to last week. But the big news today, everyone was waiting for it, was Drew Dalman, the center, former Falcon, is going to be here in Chicago. Also, a couple of other moves that I just want to mention here off the top. Dayo Odeyingbo from the Colts is on his way to Chicago, as is Pro Bowler Grady Jarrett, who was cut from the Falcons this morning and will now very quickly agree to terms with the Chicago Bears. We're going to get into all of it, but let's start with Drew Dalman, guys, because I think over the weekend that was really the news that Bears fans were waiting for. Alex, what was your immediate reaction?
Yeah, I don't know that I was surprised, just because there was so much smoke around this deal, around this move. But it's such a home run, and it feels like the final piece of Ryan Poles really revamping the interior of that line, which was a problem. I mean, Caleb Williams had so much pressure in his face up the middle so quickly, and it's important to be firm up there, because if you got a firm interior, you got a better pocket for him to step into, and it's really important to get a veteran guy with with Caleb Williams, so that he can help out with the protection slides and be like, hey, bros is coming over there. By the way, that's the mic. That's really important. So, I mean, yes, he played last 40 games with the Falcons, 4 sacks, 11 hits, 51 hurries. Those numbers are great. The veteran presence might be even more important.
Clay, that is what you have been preaching on this podcast and on the Big Pro Football Show. You wanted a veteran center. You did not want to develop someone, at least starting this year. You wanted maybe take someone later in the draft, but you really wanted this season to have a veteran center there getting the start for the year.
Absolutely, Ruthie, and I think Alex touched on that. It's big when you can get a veteran center because, obviously, protections. In the NFL, it's either the quarterback's calling out protections or the center, and then sometimes a mix depending on who you're playing against or what kind of defense you're going against. And having Drew Dalman, a guy that's done this for 4 years, we've talked about he's the 5th highest rated Pro Football Focus center in football. And this guy's good in the run game. He's good in the pass game. He's a really good zone scheme runner. Ben Johnson likes to run inside zone. He likes to run outside zone. Dalman can do all that. He's a perfect fit here. And I really like him for Caleb Williams because he's a very intelligent guy. Stanford grad. His dad played in the NFL for 8+ years. I mean, this guy can do everything that you want him to, and he's just going to help so much. He's the captain of that offensive line as a center. You know, you got to be able to point out the right mic. You got to be able to point out the blitzes. You got to be able to point out the different looks that you're getting up front. And I think Dalman is really good at doing that, and he's only 26 years old as well.
3 years, $42 million, including $28 million guaranteed. It makes him the NFL's 2nd highest paid center. That's something I think some people were critical of, but in my eyes, guys, it's Drew Dalman taking advantage of the market and the interest.
Yeah, he was talked about as the top center in this free agent class. Right. He might have been the top offensive lineman in this class, let alone position. And I think it's really important also that he is a center. He's not a guy who plays guard and center. Right. He's not a positional versatile guy. He is a center. So having one guy at one position, he's got a ton of reps there. Again, I think that's really important. And that's something that, versatility gets praised a lot. I kind of like that he's only played center. That's it.
Before we get into the defensive moves that happened today, let's talk about this offensive line, right? Because now doesn't it feel like things are starting to take form? I think there was a lot of conversation about Jonah Jackson. Where does he play, especially once you add Joe Toney, who's a left guard? Jonah Jackson also primarily has played left guard in his career. Now it really feels like Jonah Jackson is that fit at right guard, Drew Dalman at center, Joe Toney at left guard, and then you have probably Braxton Jones, which starts to feel really like a solid offensive line. I know a lot of people maybe wanted to upgrade Braxton Jones there, but man, he's been so solid, Clay, and you've talked about this.
Yeah, I think Braxton Jones is an NFL starting left tackle, and maybe you could upgrade him. Maybe you can go in the draft now and draft someone at 10. I mean, the door's still open there. But overall, what they've done with this interior, you've taken probably what was your biggest weakness as a Bears team, as an offense, and possibly made it your biggest strength with these three players. Dalman, Toney, and Jonah Jackson,
Crazy.
to me, it was your biggest weakness as a team. Interior offensive line. Now it could be the strength of the Bears.
Yeah, absolutely. And it probably makes the guys playing on the edges a little bit better, right? And this is something that Ben Johnson spoke to a little bit. Hey, we can turn this thing around really quickly because, hey, if we add a really good player here, if we add a really good player there, it makes everybody around them a little bit better. So can Joe Toney help Braxton Jones? Absolutely he can. Can the Bears improve if they add competition for Braxton Jones? Yeah, they probably can too. And, I wouldn't be surprised if they added competition for Braxton Jones.
Yeah.
They alluded to, Brian Poles said as much at the Combine, and Braxton Jones is coming off of this ankle injury. We still have to see how he looks coming off that ankle injury. So the Bears might not be done. But if they are done, adding those three pieces helps everybody.
We're going to talk a lot about this offensive line, what it means for Caleb Williams, what it means for Ben Johnson. But you know what it says to me today, guys? The pressure is on for both of those guys. Caleb Williams, Ben Johnson, this offense has to work, and it's going to take both of them, I think, to make sure that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you go back to what Ben Johnson has said in the past, and he said everything this league comes down to protecting and affecting the quarterback. And I think that's what they're doing. Obviously, you see their defensive additions that we're going to talk about shortly, but also their offensive additions and how they're playing to protect the quarterback. And now it's going to be on Caleb Williams because you've got a great line in front of him. Obviously, I think you need depth. We remember Ben Johnson saying, we need 5 offense, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He said, so you want a bunch of depth there. So I think they can sign some more guys. But overall, I really like the beginning of free agency for the Bears. And I don't think there's another team that's had such a good start as them.
But yeah, to bring it back to what you said, Ruthie, I agree wholeheartedly. I would say the onus is now on Caleb Williams. Hey, you got your rookie season out of the way. You were sacked 68 times. Let's put that in the past. Now you know what it takes. Now you know what is going to be expected of you. Get together with Ben Johnson. It's time to get to work. You've got the playmakers. You've got the protection. Go be great.
And pieces likely still on the way, guys. Before we get into maybe what this means for the Bears at number 10 overall, which we will still talk about until we can't anymore, let's talk about those defensive additions today. Dayo Odeyingbo, we've all been practicing that name today, from the Colts. This is an interior defensive lineman that really kind of seems to sound pretty nice next to Andrew Billings, Javon Dexter, and maybe rotational. Where do you see him fitting in?
Yeah, it actually kind of reminds me of the DeMarcus Walker deal a couple of years ago where it kind of looked like, hey, is this going to be a rotational guy? And DeMarcus Walker ended up being the starter. I still think the Bears are going to add more edge rushers to this group because right now you only have Montez Sweat, Austin Booker, and I guess Dominique Robinson. Darrell Taylor set to become a free agent. Jacob Martin set to become a free agent. But what does stand out about Dayo Odeyingbo, he's really young, very young guy.
Not even 26.
Not even 26. Heavy. 286 pounds, immediately becomes the heaviest defensive end on the Bears. And he can play DT, which is part of what reminds me of DeMarcus Walker. He can play DT.
I'm sorry, I said interior. I meant...
Oh, he does both.
Yeah. He does both. That's right.
He does both. He absolutely does both. And that weight profile is much more similar to Cam Jordan, who we all know was the star of Dennis Allen's Saints defensive line. I am not saying this guy is going to be a Cam Jordan, but he fits that weight profile, heavy dude.
He said it. Alex said he's going to be Cam Jordan, so if he's not, we're blaming Alex.
Yeah, right.
No, I love this move for the Bears. You're betting on a guy that's coming into his prime. I know we all wanted Montez Sweat, which I heard they mulled over, but now instead of getting a guy that's coming off his prime, you're getting a guy that's going into his prime, and you are betting a little bit on development. But with Dennis Allen, I've seen Dennis Allen, and he loves these big defensive ends, and he's good at developing them. You look at the last couple of years. His sack numbers weren't great last year, but he had 17 quarterback hits, which would have been second on the Bears behind Montez Sweat. Then you go back 2 years, he had 8 sacks and 17 hits. And he hasn't missed a game in 3 seasons, Ruthie. This guy's dependable. Yeah. He's not going to miss games, and he's a guy you can just count on week in and week out. And he's great against the run. I mean, let me tell you from experience. When you're blocking, when you're a tight end or an offensive tackle, and you're blocking a guy that's 6'6", 286 pounds, it's like you're going up against a brick wall. It's hard to move these guys in the run game, and he does got some pass rush moves. So I really like this move. He's got some developing to do, but big, athletic, strong guy, hasn't missed a game in 3 years, 17 quarterback hits each of the last 2 years, as well as 2 years ago he had 8 sacks, which would have led the Chicago Bears this season. So I think it's an excellent pickup for a 25-year-old as well.
Yeah, and then obviously I think what really caught a lot of us by surprise was the Falcons releasing Grady Jarrett, the Pro Bowler, this morning. And it only took a couple of hours for Ryan Poles to pick up the phone and call his agent and say, hey, we want him here. So Grady Jarrett also coming to Chicago. I mean, this is a complete trench overhaul, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely a few years removed from his best ball and did not have the production that you're kind of used to seeing out of him last season as he recovered from that ACL, right? His 2023 season was cut short to an ACL injury. Didn't look quite himself, but he did play all 17 games. And that is, again, what I think is really impressive about Grady Jarrett, going back to dependability. Mm-hmm. In 10 seasons, this guy has missed 12 games.
Right. Yeah.
And nine of those came in 2023 when he went down with the ACL. So extremely durable, Pro Bowl type guy. And he gives you a real 1-2 punch now with Gervon Dexter. I don't know if you're going to have him playing next to Gervon or if you're going to have him as a wave, kind of like Gervon Dexter wave 1 or Jarrett wave 2, et cetera, or maybe even flip that.
Sure.
But if the snap count maybe comes down a little bit, he doesn't need to be playing 70% of the snaps. This guy is still a Pro Bowler, an All-Pro, veteran presence who is reliable.
But he still can play those high snap amounts. You look back to last year, he played 66.8% of the snaps with the Falcons, and like Alex said, he played in all 17 games. So this guy really still can get the job done. And what needed work for the Bears defensively last year was the interior of that defensive line. Mm-hmm. The Bears allowed 136 rushing yards last year per game. That was 28th in the NFL. And so they knew they had to improve on that, and that's what they did. They went out and did that. And then yards after contact, 2.94 yards after contact was 25th in the NFL, and 5.1 yards per rush was between the tackles was the worst in the NFL. They had to shore up the middle. And this guy does that. He's done it for years. I just went back and watched some film on him from last season. He's still a ton of work. If you block this guy one-on-one, it's not going to work. He's an elusive player. He's physical. He's strong. This guy was a state championship high school wrestler. That's why he's
You
good
love wrestlers.
Wrestlers in the defensive line. If you're a wrestler, if you're a state championship wrestler, you know how to leverage, you know how to take on double teams, and that's what he is, and you see it on tape. Still to this day, that this guy has a great base. You're not going to move him in the run game, and he's still elusive and athletic enough in the pass game to get pressure from the interior.
It's really, really interesting, and what did they call him? Chef Poles back in the kitchen, right? I mean, this is really impressive.
We're giving his chef hat back.
The chef goes big. The chef goes back. I think Ben Johnson probably gets a chef hat too. Maybe they're co-chefs in the kitchen.
Chef.
Yeah, a sous chef. Great, love it. But it does feel like those two they seem to be in lockstep, right? It does feel like a lot of these moves make a lot of sense for both of them and what they're trying to accomplish in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody was saying it: trenches, 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 and they just did that out the gate. And now what it allows the Bears to do at 10, just go best player available. Right? They don't have to focus on, we really need this center, we really need this guard, we really need this, that, or the other thing. They've addressed so much that they can just let the board tell them, hey, here's what we need. Now, do they still need
Are you saying you want Ashton Jeanty? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
I don't know. I think it opens the door for Ashton Jeanty. But, I mean, when you look at the running backs, there's so many good running backs this year that I still think I go edge rusher and then get a running back on day 2 because there's so many great running backs. But it opens the door. I'm more open to Ashton Jeanty today than I was last week, that's for sure.
Yeah, they take care of their needs.
If Will Campbell is there at 10, you're going to pass on him.
I might, because I might want a left tackle, because now you think that you've got a good interior, young center, one young guard, and then obviously Joe Toney. Hopefully we get 2 or 3 more years from him. But Armand Membu, Kelvin Banks, left tackle. I know we got Braxton, and I'm not saying Braxton won't start. Maybe he can bring up these tackles a little bit later. But you want, in my opinion, you've started this offensive line redevelopment here. You got a good group. Now let's go for a stalwart left tackle. That's my first hope. And then I would say an edge rusher like Alex is talking about. But there is a deep edge rushing class. If you're in love with Jeanty, if you're in love with Omarion Hampton, a running back, Ben Johnson used 2 running backs. I think he was the only offensive coordinator in the NFL to have 2 guys with 1,000 yards 2 years ago. Almost had 2 guys with 1,000 yards last year, too, even though David Montgomery was hurt. He needs 2 good running backs. So if he goes Jeanty or Omarion Hampton, I'm not going to criticize it. He knows he needs a running back, and he runs the ball a lot. So they've opened up the draft board, like you said, and there is depth at tackle and at edge rusher. So I wouldn't be opposed to it. But right now, I would say if I have the chef hat on, if I have the apron on, give me a left tackle to go with the rest of these studs that you just got up front.
That's really my biggest takeaway, guys, is I feel like you can never have too many offensive linemen. You can never have too many defensive linemen either. But I think it's so hard, and we've seen this year in and year out in Chicago, it's so hard to find offensive linemen on the free market. They just don't come on very. So if you can get one, develop one, keep him in your system, and be ready, to plug and play wherever you may need him, I just think that's an opportunity you can't pass up if you are in love with someone that has a lot of potential, i.e., a Will Campbell.
Yeah, Ruthie Polinsky for GM. I think Will Campbell's there. Obviously, he's a guy that some think he's a guard. I think he can play tackle, even though he's got the T-Rex arms. It's like the 7th percentile.
I'm done with the T-Rex arms.
But I'm just saying, he does got very small arms. And if you start taking guys that are exceptions, you're going to have a team full of exceptions. But I think Will Campbell's different. He played in the SEC. He didn't give up a sack for 27 straight games in SEC football.
Yeah.
Come on, Alex.
I mean, he said it himself. He goes, go look at my tape. I don't think you're fine to play on there. We said, he gave up a pressure because his arms were too short. I loved that answer. I loved that. I was like, okay, Will Campbell, talk your talk. So we'll see whether he ends up being a tackle or a guard, but he's there. And then going back to your point about it's hard to find offensive linemen on the free market, yet the Bears did that at center, right? Mm-hmm. They got the guy, they spent him. Shout out Ryan Poles for being so disciplined with his salary cap until this moment when they were kind of ready to go. Because
that's a good point.
They're ready to go, and now he's ready to spend, and they still have been kind of disciplined. What's the unifying thing with all these deals? 3-year deals that all line up with Caleb Williams' rookie contract. On the other hand, you have the Atlanta Falcons, who had to release Grady Jarrett, face of the franchise, who could not re-sign Drew Dalman. Why? Because they spent so much money in free agency that they had to clear the decks, right? They had to reset.
Kirk Cousins really coming back to bite you here in Atlanta. I agree. And I did want to point out one other thing that happened today, guys, after the Chicago Bears social media team gave us quite the tease and releasing a Khalil Mack essentially highlight video. Of course, there were other guys in that video, but a lot of Khalil Mack in there as well. Khalil Mack is staying in LA with the Chargers. Where did that come from? Do we think there was ever a chance that he was coming back to Chicago?
So surprisingly, I don't think Ryan Poles was doing the social media for the Bears, but
Correct.
I mean, that was interesting how they put him on there so much. And just reading like the column, the Chicago Tribune, Brad Biggs, very connected guy. He said they were mulling over the Khalil Mack deal.
Yeah.
I don't think they wanted to give up $18 million on a 34-year-old Khalil Mack who had one of his lowest sack totals last year. So maybe they were thinking about it, but then when they didn't go Mack, you have a great second option there. I mean, Odeyingbo, like we said, is 25 years old. He's a guy that's bigger. He fits Dennis Allen's scheme better. So I think he was on their mind, but they just priced him out for an older guy, and I think, honestly, it probably worked out for the best.
Yeah. Were you going to say?
No, I mean, I'm sure that they kick the tires. I mean, it's their job to call and say, hey, you want to come back to Chicago? It's their job to say, what would it take? So I would wager that, yes, those conversations were had, but when you see what the Chargers paid to retain him, that did not feel like it was going to align. We just got done talking about how Ryan Poles so disciplined with his salary cap money and so good about not overpaying for guys. I don't think that Poles would have been comfortable giving that money to Khalil Mack.
One other thing that I feel like we haven't gotten to yet is, Clay, you know Joe Toney really well. You were his roommate in New England briefly. I covered Joe Toney in New England for a couple seasons. And the one thing that I think we haven't touched on yet about this offensive line overhaul, I guess interior offensive line overhaul, is the leadership, the character, the Drew Dalman, the Joe Toney. I don't know a ton about Jonah Jackson, but I imagine that if Ben Johnson has a relationship with him, has worked with him in the past, he's another one. I always look at who do you want to go to in the locker room to talk to after a game on the offensive line to speak about what went wrong or what went right? And I feel for so many years here in Chicago, hasn't really been a go-to guy on that offensive line when it comes to leadership. You always wanted to hear what Joe Toney said in New England. You always wanted to hear what David Andrews had to say in New England about the game. So to have that sort of leadership, I would love, you imagine Joe Toney is going to be a captain on this team, and hopefully not one of 8. Hopefully he's one of a few, not 8, right? But what I will say, to have someone like Joe Toney on that team, on that offensive line, helping develop Drew Dalman, who's still a young guy, helping develop Caleb Williams, who obviously, as we know, needs a lot of help. And I just think it's going to be really exciting to see sort of the development and the character. And really, it doesn't take that long for culture to flip. And I think we're seeing that happen before our eyes.
You're absolutely right. And I had the privilege of speaking with the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs, Andy Reid, this weekend.
The guy who drafted you.
The guy who drafted me, yes.
In Philly.
And we talked about Joe Toney, and he had nothing but the best things to say about Joe Toney, and it was good to hear that. Coach Reid, you could hear in his voice, he's like, man, we didn't want to get rid of him, but this salary cap thing, so you got to make tough decisions. And this one, he goes, it kicked me in my butt, but we had to let him go. He goes, you guys got a good player, a great player. He said, quote, this guy still can play at a high level. And then he also said that he is a tough, dirty, nasty player, which weird thing to say, connotations, but no. That means when he's on the field, this guy is going to give you everything. Mean. He's playing to the whistle, and that's the exact attitude that I want my offensive line to have. You know, going into a game, if you have an offensive line with that attitude, it's going to be a long game for that defense. And Joe Toney brings that to the locker room. The one thing a lot of people don't know about Joe Toney, they know how good he is, but he is super intelligent, like almost like Rain Man, freakishly smart. He's just a guy that can pick up an offense like that. I remember when we lived together and we're trying to learn the offense. He's a rookie. I've been in the league for 8 years, 7 years at that point. And this guy's coming home and we're trying to quiz each other. He knows every answer. And I have a system of how I put together, my offenses that I thought I had perfected. And he's just crushing me in these quizzes. He knows everything like that. And he's a guy that started as a rookie, 3rd-round pick with Tom Brady at quarterback and won a Super Bowl. That tells you right there. This guy's won 4 Super Bowls. He's been in 6. Joe Toney is going to bring a different attitude. He's going to bring a leader. He's going to bring everything you need to that locker room. And he's not the rah-rah, let's win one for the Gipper, we're going to bang my head on the wall. But he's a guy that's going to show you how to get things done, training room, obviously on the field, off the field. And he's a guy that can bring up these leaders and help develop these young players.
Talk to me about that relationship between a guard and the tackle that play on the same side of the line and what he can provide for a Braxton Jones.
Oh, it's huge. The offensive line relationship it's my favorite relationships on the team. I mean, from you covering football, you've probably seen that too. They're also close-knit, especially guards and tackles. These guys are locked at the hip. You got to know your combination blocks. You got to know your calls. You got to know your calls for the blitz. When he calls a mic, you got to know why he mic'd him and he didn't mic him. So overall, I just think having Dalman, having Toney, having Jonah Jackson, having these guys all together is such a huge upgrade, and they're gonna learn how to play off each other. They're veterans; they've all done it before, and it's having something consistent in place, not trying to figure out who's going to be here, who's going to be here. Obviously, we don't know where injuries go, but that means something because you learn how the guy next to you makes calls. You learn how he takes his steps in the run game, so you can take your steps off of him. There's a lot more than goes to it than just plugging 2 good players next to each other and hoping they do well. You got to know the guy next to you, and I think they're going to build that trust together throughout OTAs.
Anything else you guys that took away from today? Obviously, this was very Bears focused, but just from around the league, anything stand out to you that you wanted to mention? I mean, you talked about it, Clay. You think the Bears maybe had the best day. I think you also look at the Patriots, you look at the Commanders, people that really went out, balls to the wall, as they say, and just like really just. Can I say that on this show? Maybe not. But it's a podcast. All right.
You can say anything.
We might be on TV, but we could leave it out. But really just gave it all, right, to go sort of do what they needed to do. And or maybe it's hard to think about the Patriots going from what they were last year to maybe being in like win now mode. But it does sort of feel like they could take a leap. And the Commanders, obviously you saw them last year and what they were able to do.
I think the Commanders adding Laramie Tunsil in that deal is just incredible, right? I mean, Jaden Daniels. Everybody knew Jaden Daniels was going to be good. I don't think anybody would have said, like, oh, yeah, we think he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league and is going to lead the Commanders to the NFC title game as a rookie, and he absolutely did. He was phenomenal. So what do? Oh, let's go get him this dynamite left tackle and make sure that he's well protected. So the Commanders, that was a huge move. And like, you kind of got to look at the Commanders as a perennial contender. Like, have they cemented themselves? Because they're not on fluke watch now, right? Before it was like, okay, can you do it again?
Got a receiver too, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're getting better and better and better, and they'd be like, hey, we got real close to the Super Bowl. That is an all-in type move.
Yeah.
But it like wasn't an all-in type price either. Just a phenomenal move for the Commanders.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Alex is saying, Eagles are losing players, the Commanders are gaining players. No team in the last 25 years has won the NFC East in two consecutive years, which is crazy. So the Eagles are going to have some competition as far as the Commanders are concerned with this big offensive line. You're adding Deebo Samuel. Obviously, we know what Jaden Daniels can do. But then, obviously, Justin Fields to the Jets, putting him in a backfield with Breece Hall, I think that's exciting.
Reunion with Garrett Wilson.
Exactly. Garrett Wilson, his old college teammate. Sam Darnold leaving the Vikings. So does JJ. JJ's in the NFC North, so the Bears are probably going against JJ McCarthy. Sam Darnold's gone. Now, the Seahawks, like what's their plan? I thought that was interesting when they got rid of Geno Smith. What are they doing? They bring in Darnold. And then obviously, I know we're getting a little off base here, but the Raiders. I thought the Raiders made some interesting moves, bringing in Geno Smith with that trade, and it's exciting to see what they're doing with Pete Carroll. But the NFL is fun right now, Ruthie.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff, a lot of stories.
No off season, no such thing.
No way.
Great stuff, guys. Really fun, busy day. I feel like we got a lot in there. We're obviously going to be talking about this all week on the Big Pro Football Show. We'll also be recapping more moves, I'm sure, that were still to come on the Charter podcast later this week. So for Alex Shapiro, Clay Harbor, I'm Ruthie Polinsky. Thanks for listening to the Charter podcast, brought to you by St. Xavier University. We will see you next time.